Hello and welcome back to Happy Hour. I'm your host, DJ Kyle, and sitting here right next to me, one of my most favorite people to have on the show. It's Professor Jim Pasley. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Good,
Glad to be here.
Well, it's very good to have you on the show. We absolutely love having you here. So now, I understand we might have to be a little quiet on today's show because we're talking about the history of libraries.
Yes. Well, we won't be quiet.
Yeah, I guess we're not in a library.
That's right. And I guess for those of you that don't know, I've been appointed as the new director of the Camden County Library System. So I have 6 libraries I'm working with, and it's been fun already.
Absolutely. So you definitely have a lot of work to do. That's a lot of stuff to do, but it's really neat to kind of get back to the basics of how did this start to bring you to where you are right now?
Exactly. And we have a great library system here, folks, and I thought I'd share a little bit first about libraries and then a little history to go with it.
Yeah.
Basically, as most of you know, there's been some controversy over our libraries, and not just here, but statewide, as to what's in them and what people have access to, et cetera. And it's something that it's kind of like what the schools had when they were talking about what's being taught. Mm-hmm. Well, the libraries find themselves in something of the same conundrum, if you will. Now, you have to ask yourself, libraries, who needs them? I mean, in high school we had one, right? And you usually had that one little lady in the back, and you go, right? Yeah. But a lot of people nowadays say, I don't need a library. I can get everything I want on my phone or on my laptop. Well, there's a problem with that, because what happens here is, first, who's putting the information in that laptop or in your phone? How do you know that that's accurate, right?
Yeah.
And we all have a tendency to just say, well, I saw it on TikTok, so it has to be
internet.
true. Yeah, so it's good, right? And so what happens here is that even if you get the information, what do you plan on doing with it? Are you going to share it with your friends? Does that make you the expert because you looked it up? Amongst your friends, or and God forbid if somebody challenges you on it, what background do you have? So basically, libraries are great in that they not only provide resources but opportunities to learn, and that's the big thing, And I really, if I could, I'd change all the name over every library. I'd take library away, and I'd say opportunity would be the big sign out front, because you can go in there and learn at your own pace. And pick topics that you want. We hated it when we were in school because you're going to have to study this, algebra. Really? What am I going to do with that? But now, think about it, folks. You have the opportunity to learn anything you want, and we've got the resources to help you. Mm-hmm. Now, how did this all start? That's the big question. Of all things, Thomas Jefferson, he said it best. He said, an educated citizenry is a vital requisite to our survival as a free people. In other words, he said, we want everybody to be knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Because, think about it. If you go to vote, you should know what the issues are. Mm-hmm. You should know, about society and what's happening. What are the big issues? And you can't do that if you don't have the research.
Yeah.
So libraries are a great source for that. Now, before public libraries, this was interesting. What they did is only rich people could afford books. They were expensive, and it was hard to make them. And so just a handful of people actually had books. And the rich people would get together and they'd form a little club. And they would get in there, and they'd have a little toddy and smoke a cigar, and they all brought their books, and then they shared the books amongst themselves.
So it was like the first book club, right?
Yes, it was a book club. So you'd have your books, I'd have mine, and we'd learn from each other's books, okay? And the idea is that you were a member of that club, and you were the only ones that had access to the books.
Yeah.
Well, then somebody started looking at the different texts that were coming out. All of a sudden we come to the age of the Enlightenment, and there's all kinds of books on science and everything else. Originally they were just pretty much religion and law. Now all of a sudden there's all kinds of other books, interesting stuff. And so these guys started saying, well, yeah, we've got our library and we need to start buying more books. And most of them came from England, so they needed funding to do it. And what they did is they started a membership club. In other words, okay, if we're going to need to buy more books, we'll let people join our book club for X amount of dollars, and then we'll use the money to buy more books. And so then it becomes a membership thing.
Yeah.
And you had to be a member in order to get a book to read. And you still couldn't check them out. They all stayed there because, anybody's stealing my books.
Don't want
right?
to steal a book.
Yeah. Well, then what we saw happen in the pre-Revolutionary War America, like I say, books were hard to come by. And if you weren't wealthy or a member of the clergy, you just didn't have a book.
Yeah.
Okay? And they started looking at this. And so what happened is in July of 1731, the founding father, Benjamin Franklin, of all people, Ben, he helped bring the membership library to the American colonies. He's saying this is a good idea. This is a great way to educate the people. And so he started the first library where you could be a member, you could buy into it, for a small fee, and then you could check books in and out, etc. So Benny Boy was our guy, right? And he worked with the other members of what was called the Junto, Junto. And it was just a club of thinkers who would get together and do like book reviews.
Yeah.
And so these guys, they started, looking at the books and thinking, man, we ought to share this with the local merchants and the educators in the community and so on and so forth. And so they started building this library up, if you will. And it wound up being 40 shillings for each of the first 50 members. And then from there, they expanded out, and for a small fee, you could join.
Yeah.
And so it's still one of those where membership had its privileges. Well, what happened is then in 1790, Franklin himself, he turned around and he donated a huge collection of his books to a town in Massachusetts named Franklin. And Franklin, Massachusetts, had the first library, and it was based on books that Ben had given them.
Yeah.
So this becomes a public library.
So
and
was this the first free?
Yes.
Like the one that you don't have to pay for the membership?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So Ben Franklin started the first free one.
Public library.
Huh. That
he
is
was
great.
the guy. Isn't it great? Yeah. Now, what was interesting is public libraries started popping up everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
They thought, well, this is a heck of an idea. And so they started building all of these different libraries, and primarily after the Civil War is when we saw this huge expansion to the point where there are almost 3,500 public libraries nationwide. And bear in mind, the nation only went just about to the Mississippi River, and that was it. Now, what was interesting, just 150 years after Franklin had formed that first library, like I say, we had thousands of them. In almost any town you could go to, you had a public library. Now, basically, along comes an entrepreneur named Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was one of the millionaires that we've talked about on some of the other shows, made all of his money in steel. Well, you can only make so much money. He retires. He sold his steel empire to U.S. Steel, and he's sitting there on all this money. He thought, I really ought to do something good. And he decided libraries was his cause.
Yeah.
And this guy spent millions building public libraries, okay? And it is just fascinating when you start looking at it. He built 2,509 libraries.
Wow.
Yeah, out of his pocket, right? And he built libraries worldwide between 1883 and 1929. And so this guy, just absolutely fascinating to me in that he had the money, he could have done anything he wanted with it, but instead he bought into what Thomas Jefferson had said.
Yeah.
That an educated public is imperative for our freedom to continue. And the guy put his money where his mouth was.
Yeah. Now we don't have much time left, but this is showing the importance of that knowledge and teaching people and the opportunity, like you said.
Exactly. And he thought the same thing, what he did on every library, on every Carnegie library. To this day, if you go and look, what he did is he said, I resolved that if wealth ever came to me, that it should be used to establish free libraries, and he did, providing public libraries to communities across the country. Every one of his libraries, above the door, is engraved an image of the rising sun, and it says, "Let there be light."
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That is really cool.
Yeah, so he was the same idea, was libraries are an opportunity. So get out there and use our public libraries, and I'm going to do everything I can to help y'all.
Absolutely. Professor Jim Pasley, thank you so much
You
for
bet.
coming in. And it's so interesting to see this. So again, go check out your public library today. We have more Happy Hour coming up after this.